Stop acting obsolete, Denise. It's just cosmetic pitting. Grant Voss threw the words across Unit 4's control deck at 0612, loud enough to cut through blower noise, radio chatter, and the metallic hum that lived inside old process plants before sunrise. He did not say it privately. He said it in front of 2 board operators, 4 turnaround contractors in fresh orange coveralls, a scaffold foreman carrying a punch list, and a junior operator who hadn't yet learned how quickly a bad order could become a permanent memory. Grant stood close, one polished boot over the yellow line, his hard hat still clean from the trailer, index finger pointed like a tool he used too often. Denise Hayes did not move her feet. She had stopped restart 6 minutes earlier when she saw the overnight ultrasonic thickness grid and the red acoustic emission alarm trend on the startup monitor. The contactor sat 30 meters away, matte gray under floodlights, a vertical pressure vessel built when shoulder pads were in fashion and analog gauges still ruled the panel. It had run hard for 3 decades. It had earned every scar on its shell. The difference that morning was that one of those scars had crossed the line from ugly to unstable. Grant read her stillness as uncertainty, or chose to frame it that way. You heard me, we're 20 hours behind. This is a turnaround, not a classroom. Turn the sequence back on. Denise kept her eyes on him long enough to make the boundary clear, then looked down at the corrosion map clipped to the board. A red hatch zone wrapped around a longitudinal seam in the lower third of the shell. Last run, nominal wall 1.25 inches. Current minimum in that zone, 0.68. The number sat there like a verdict. She lifted the sheet so everyone on deck could see it. This isn't paint damage. We lost nearly half wall thickness at the seam toe. UT confirms it. Acoustic emission flagged active crack growth at 541. That is live propagation, not old noise. One contractor shifted his weight and looked away from Grant. The scaffold foreman leaned in, reading the grid with the expression of a man doing fast arithmetic on risk he had not priced into his day. Grant gave a dry laugh and glanced at the crew as if pulling them in. There she goes. Every year, same speech. You people wonder why projects slip. The insult landed harder than she expected, not because she believed him, but because she recognized the tactic. Public belittling forced speed, artificial urgency, then a binary order designed to erase accountability. Do it now or explain delay later. She had watched it play out in 3 plants and 1 terminal. The details changed. The physics did not. She set the clipboard down, flat and deliberate. My name is Denise Hayes. I'm the senior pressure systems specialist on this site. 17 years in refinery startups, shutdowns, and incident review. I make $186,000 a year because my signature keeps people alive when schedules start lying. The younger operator blinked. One of the board operators lowered his radio and listened. Grant's jaw flexed. Don't perform for me. I'm not performing, she said. I'm documenting. He stepped closer, voice dropping into that controlled tone managers used when they wanted aggression to sound procedural. You are blocking startup on cosmetic pitting. You are creating downtime. You are acting lazy and obsolete. The words lazy and obsolete hit in sequence, deliberate, sharpened by witnesses. Denise felt the heat of anger rise in her throat, then trained it into structure the way she had been taught by old operators who survived long careers by translating panic into plain language. She reached behind her for the binder-tabbed startup protocol, Unit 4 amine service, and opened to staged preheat and pressure ramp limits. "Read line 7, she said. Grant did not. She read it out loud instead. "If localized wall loss exceeds 30% in heat-affected zones adjacent to longitudinal seams, startup is suspended pending engineering disposition. We're at 45.6% at minimum point. We are beyond suspension trigger. That's the first stop." She turned a page. Second stop. Evidence of hydrogen blistering in the same zone. We have that from internal visual and phased array follow-up yesterday afternoon. Third stop. Active acoustic emissions in startup window. We have that too. Grant waved a dismissive hand. "You can make any chart look scary." Denise pointed through the control room glass toward the vessel, where morning steam drifted in thin veils around ladders and insulation bands. "That shell is rated 1,850 pounds per square inch, and today's metal temperature target is 640 Fahrenheit. During startup, a cold, lean amine slug can hit the lower section before staged preheat catches up. Cold slug plus brittle zone plus pressure ramp is thermal shock. Thermal shock at a compromised seam is fragmentation risk." She paused, making sure every set of eyes on deck stayed with her. Fragmentation means the vessel does not leak politely. It comes apart. Grant gave her a hard smile that never reached his eyes. "You're catastrophizing. It's a refinery, Denise. Everything is risk." "Correct," she said. "Everything is risk. This risk is quantifiable and avoidable. There's a difference." At 6:14, the first wave of day shift mechanics moved along the pipe rack to the west, lunch coolers swinging by their legs. On the east side, the motor control center building sat in line with the contactor's long axis. Downwind by forecast, 40 meters south, the contractor brake area had already started filling with welders waiting on permits. Denise had walked that geography before dawn with a flashlight and a notepad. She knew where fragments would go if the seam failed along vector. She knew what blast overpressure could do to control room glass. She knew how little warning noise a failing vessel offered once crack growth crossed from subcritical to unstable. Grant looked past her to Eli Morton, the junior operator, then back to her. "You're freezing an entire unit because you saw rust and heard ghosts in a microphone." "Not rust," she replied. "Pitting, measured, mapped, trend confirmed. And acoustic emission sensors don't hear ghosts. They hear energy released from crack activity." Grant's voice rose again, performance mode restored. "Do your job or get off my deck." Denise held his gaze. "This is my job." For 3 seconds, neither spoke. The deck seemed to narrow around them, a corridor made of steel railing, cable trays, and expectation. Compressor vibration throbbed through the grating under her boots. Somewhere below, a valve handwheel clanged and spun, then stopped. Radios cracked with status checks from units that were not currently trying to gamble with fracture mechanics. Grant leaned in until only she and the nearest operator could hear him clearly. "You want to be the hero? Fine. But if this startup misses shift change throughput, I write you up for insubordination and delay damages." There it was, the true mechanism. Not pitting, not sensors. Bonus timing and investor optics compressed into a threat package. Denise felt the insult shock settle into something colder and more useful. Fear was not the right word. She was not afraid of Grant. She was afraid of what happened when someone with authority treated technical boundaries like negotiation points. She had seen crushed structures, flash fires, and one separator shell peeled open like a can after a temporary override became permanent for 20 minutes. She did not need imagination. She had case numbers. She reached for the panel key, lifted it, and set it on top of the startup console where everyone could see it was not in the switch. No staged preheat, no ramp. No verified engineering disposition, no restart, she said. You can threaten my badge. You can remove me from panel. But you cannot make this vessel stronger by calling it Cosmetic. Grant turned slightly, scanning faces for allies. The contractors looked occupied with clipboards they were not reading. The board operators stood very still. Eli stared at the key. Grant tried one more simplification, sharp and contemptuous. It's just a steel cylinder. Denise answered in the same tone she used during emergency drills. Exactly. A steel cylinder under pressure obeys stress, temperature, and flaw geometry. It does not obey you. The sentence traveled through the deck and stayed there. Denise watched eyes shift from Grant to the vessel and back. No one on the grating looked confused. At 6:17, the shift superintendent called on radio for Unit 4 restart status. Grant grabbed his handset first. Minor hold, he said. Technical review. Denise listened to the phrase and marked it internally. Not safety hold, not integrity concern. Minor hold. Language was the first place truth got diluted before procedures followed. He clipped the radio back and faced her with a flat expression. You bought yourself 10 minutes. Engineering will clear it. Denise shook her head once. Engineering can evaluate. Engineering cannot repeal damage already in the shell. Grant stepped back, finally breaking the invasion posture, and motioned for Eli to approach the panel. It was not yet a formal replacement, not yet written, but the intent flashed plain enough that even Eli hesitated. Denise caught that glance. It was the kind that asked for permission without words, the kind new operators gave veterans when hierarchy and hazard pointed in opposite directions. Do not touch the key without written disposition and staged preheat confirmation, she said to Eli, clear, audible, and recorded by at least 2 body mics on contractor PPE. That is a direct safety instruction. Eli swallowed and nodded once. Grant exhaled through his nose, an impatient animal sound. We'll see. Denise picked up the corrosion map again. Her hands were steady now. The public insult had done what insults often did. It stripped the argument down to its real shape. This was no longer a debate about interpretation. It was a contest between schedule authority and material reality, conducted in front of people who would later swear under oath about who said what and when. She looked at the red-hatched seam zone, then at Grant's face, and understood with absolute clarity that morning had already crossed its first irreversible threshold. The restart had paused. The conflict had gone public. Every sentence from this point forward would either build a defensible chain of safety decisions or become exhibit material in a ruin someone would call unforeseen because they lacked the courage to call it chosen. Denise slid the corrosion map back into the clear sleeve and turned toward the console without waiting for anyone's permission. Her pulse had steadied, but her hearing sharpened in that familiar way it did when a unit sat one bad decision away from kinetic failure. She could pick out every layer of plant sound. The distant whine of an induced draft fan, The irregular chuff of steam tracing through a drain pot, the quick, clipped squawk of handheld radios across 3 units. None of those sounds worried her. What worried her was the signal she could not hear with human ears, already flashing red on the acoustic panel. She keyed her radio. "Inspection trailer, this is Hayes at Unit 4 startup deck. I need raw A-scan files from overnight grid, channel-by-channel acoustic emission log from 5 o'clock forward, and last PAUT seam images. Push to my terminal now. Confirm." A woman answered over static, voice tight and awake. "Copy, Denise. Uploading now. Hard copies in 2 minutes." Denise tapped the screen and brought up the vessel tag. C4403, high-pressure amine contactor, built 30 years earlier, re-rated twice, still listed at 1,850 pounds per square inch maximum allowable working pressure with strict startup thermal sequencing. On paper, it was a robust shell. In real steel, paper limits only held if thickness, toughness, and temperature moved together inside design assumptions. Her job existed because those assumptions aged faster than budgets admitted. By 6:20, the first file finished loading. The UT grid bloomed across the monitor in color blocks, from green to yellow to red, each square linked to an exact coordinate. The red band at the longitudinal seam toe was wider than it had been at 2 o'clock. Not by much, but by enough to break trust. She zoomed in until individual readings filled the screen. 1.25 inches nominal, 0.93 near mid-shell, 0.81 at clock position 4, 0.74, 0.71, 0.68 at S-17L, 3 inches off seam, heat-affected zone. Denise heard boots on grating behind her. Eli had moved closer, helmet chin strap loose, eyes fixed on the screen like he was trying to memorize what danger looked like before it moved. She did not turn yet. "You're looking at wall loss progression, not one bad spot," she said. "See the gradient into the seam? That's not random corrosion. That's concentrated thinning where stress already lives." Eli spoke quietly. "Couldn't we just hold below 1,200 and creep it?" She appreciated the question because it meant he was thinking in mechanisms, not orders. She pointed at the narrow red line riding the seam itself. "If this were only thinning, maybe with engineering controls. But this line is paired with blistering and active acoustic hits. Different failure mode." He frowned. "Explain it to me like I'm new." "You are new, that's why you ask." She expanded a second window with metallurgical notes from yesterday's internal exam. "Hydrogen in amine service can diffuse into steel over time. It creates blisters and micro cracks, especially near weld heat-affected zones. When you hit that zone with rapid pressure plus temperature differential, those micro cracks can link up. That is crack growth. If growth goes unstable along a longitudinal seam, failure can run like a zipper. Fast." Eli's mouth tightened. Not a pinhole leak. The inspection courier arrived with a binder and a tablet, handing both to Denise with a nod. The courier's gloves were still damp with dew from crossing the yard. Denise signed receipt time, 6:22, because timestamps mattered later when memory got political. She opened the binder to the phased array images. The weld profile showed irregular reflectors near the toe, small but numerous, with one connected indication that had not been there at the last major turnaround. She flipped to the borescope stills. Rounded hydrogen blisters scattered like small moons beneath the inner surface scale. Grant stayed 10 steps away on purpose, talking into his phone. half profile to the group, performing calm for whoever sat on the other end of the line. Denise clocked him in peripheral vision and kept working. She loaded the acoustic emission trend. The graph rose across the last 40 minutes in stepped bursts, each burst tagged by energy count and location triangulation. Channel 7 flashed crimson near the same seam coordinate as S-17L. Hit rate climbed during early warm circulation, dipped, then climbed again. At 5:41, the system had generated a red advisory, active source consistent with crack extension. At 6:03, another cluster. Denise called out to the board operator at the auxiliary station. Pull skin mic waveform history for C4403 and overlay startup valve positions from 0530. The operator answered, "On it." She turned to Eli now, making sure he saw her face, not just the monitor. Acoustic emission means the steel is releasing strain energy as tiny events. Think of it as hearing the material complain before it tears. One isolated event can be noise. Clustered, repeatable, location-consistent events are not noise. Eli nodded once, slower this time. So the vessel was already talking. It was. A soft alarm chirped from the side panel, not loud, just insistent. She checked the tag. AE channel quality fault cleared, signal restored, then immediate hit count spike. The red icon pulsed again. Grant looked over at the sound and gave a theatrical shrug but did not come closer. Denise did not invite him. She grabbed a field radio and switched to local channel. "Outside round, this is Hayes. I need visual confirmation at seam inspection window on C4403 lower shell. No contact, no tapping, just eyes and thermal camera if available." A technician answered from ground level. "Copy. Walking up now." Denise moved to the deck rail and looked toward the vessel. Dawn had finally lifted enough to flatten shadows on the shell bands. Steam traced around insulation gaps like pale ribbon. The inspection window plate removed during turnaround was still open at chest height on the west side, exposing bare metal where coating had been cleaned for NDE. Even from deck distance, she could see the patched chalk marks from overnight measurement points. "Hayes, round here," came the radio. "At window now. I can see pitting field around tow. There's a linear indication about 4 inches aligned with seam direction. Thermal camera shows cooler streak below it, maybe from last washdown, maybe trapped fluid behind insulation edge." Denise closed her eyes for one brief second, building the map in her head. Cooler streak at the lower shell before preheat completion meant local temperature differential was plausible. Thermal shock did not need dramatic swings. It needed mismatch in the wrong metal at the wrong moment. "Do not touch anything," she said. "Take photos with timestamp board. Send to my terminal." "Copy." The board operator called from behind her. "Overlay done. Every AE spike corresponds with micro position changes on feed control valve while they were testing response." Denise walked back and scanned the combined trend. The pattern was ugly in the way only consistent data could be ugly. Small feed perturbations, small pressure bumps, measurable acoustic activity in the compromised zone. The vessel was telegraphing low tolerance before the real ramp had even started. Grant ended his call and approached again. Voice controlled. Public. "Are we done with diagnostics theater?" Denise kept her eyes on the screen. "No. We're documenting a propagation mechanism." He folded his arms. Engineering has seen old metal panic before. Then engineering will appreciate complete data. He leaned closer to the monitor, trying to force casual authority into the posture. I see colors and noise. I do not see a crack through wall. Denise met his gaze. You don't wait for through wall on a pressure boundary with active emissions. Through wall is failure progress, not warning. Grant gave Eli a sideways look. You hearing this? She'll keep us parked until next quarter. Eli did not answer. He kept watching the trend line climb by single increments. Denise returned to procedure. She opened the startup protocol and entered a formal integrity hold note in the digital log. Hold code for A, integrity uncertainty exceeding trigger threshold. Restart prohibited pending mechanical engineering disposition and revised thermal conditioning plan. She attached UT, PAUT, AE, and field thermal images. Then she printed 2 copies, signed both, and handed one to the board operator for control room records. If anyone tried later to claim ambiguity, the log would disagree. At 6:29, the outside technician's photos arrived. Denise enlarged the seam window image until the pitted surface filled the frame. The pits were not decorative freckles. They were irregular cavities, some shallow, some deep, clustered where weld geometry already magnified stress. Next image. A fine linear mark at the toe, dark and narrow, with a slight branch at one end. Third image. Thermal shot showing a cooler vertical streak crossing the same zone. She felt Eli step up beside her again. That line, he said, could be grind mark? Could be, Denise said, or crack mouth. We don't guess. We verify with dye penetrant at minimum, maybe replication if engineering requests, but not under pressure. He looked toward the vessel, then back to the panel key still resting on the console. If someone made me run this anyway, what would I watch first? Denise answered without pause. Shell ping clusters, strain trend, and low-frequency hammering in wall microphones. If those rise during ramp, you stop immediately into pressure. No debate. Grant snorted. You're coaching him to sabotage. Denise spoke evenly. I am coaching him to survive. The deck went quiet except for machinery and wind. One of the contractors, older, face creased from decades of hot work, stared through the glass at C4403 and muttered just loud enough for nearby ears. That seam looks tired. Denise heard him and gave a small nod. Tired metal was not a technical term, but every seasoned worker understood it. She pulled up the metallurgy note from an older incident database and showed Eli 3 photos from another site years ago. A seam split after thermal transients. Shell peeled back in a controlled training archive image with no people in frame. This is what unstable longitudinal fracture looks like after the fact. It starts microscopic. It ends fast. Eli swallowed. How fast? From stable to unstable can be seconds once conditions align. Grant checked his watch with obvious irritation. You've made your point. Send it upstairs. I'm not waiting all morning. I already sent it, Denise said. Mechanical integrity, process engineering, shift superintendent, and site safety. Full attachment package. He stared at her, and she watched calculation replace anger for a moment. People like Grant preferred verbal pressure because verbal pressure evaporated. Logged packets did not. He reached for his radio anyway. Before he could speak, another alarm tapped in from the acoustic console. This time a tighter burst. Denise opened the event list. 3 hits in 6 seconds, same location family, amplitude above prior baseline. Not catastrophic yet, not random either. She keyed local channel again. Outside round, status at window. Still clear, no visible growth, but there's intermittent ticking at shell if I stand close. Faint. Denise felt the back of her neck tighten. Back away 10 meters and stay there. No one loiters near C4403 shell. Copy. Moving now. She turned to the board operator. Mark restricted perimeter around vessel body until engineering disposition. Post runners at north and south access. Grant snapped, "You don't set perimeter, I do." Denise answered without raising her voice. Site safety policy sets perimeter when integrity hold includes active crack indication. I'm applying policy. He opened his mouth, shut it, then keyed his radio with clipped words she could not fully hear. She caught only 2 phrases: temporary perimeter and pending review. Language shaped to make necessity sound optional. By 6:34, orange cones and caution tape started appearing on the lower walkways. 2 contractors redirected traffic near the break area path, grumbling about detours but complying. Denise watched the movement and counted heads inside and outside the new boundary. No one argued once they saw the red tag on the control log. A fresh printout rolled from the trend printer. She tore it free and laid it over the earlier curve. The slope change was unmistakable. Minor process perturbations were now producing larger acoustic responses. Classic nonlinearity. The structure was becoming more sensitive, not less. Eli saw it too. That's bad, right? Yes, Denise said. That means margin is shrinking while we are still at low stress. She wrote one more line in the log, deliberate block letters. Active AE escalation observed under low load conditions. Startup prohibited. Immediate engineering review required before any pressure increase. Then she signed again. The morning light brightened across the deck, turning the vessel shell from slate gray to pale steel. It looked ordinary from a distance, almost dull. The kind of equipment people walked past for years without looking twice. Denise knew better. Most catastrophic hardware gave no theatrical warning. It offered data, then silence, then force. She stood at the console with the printout in one hand and the hold record in the other, listening to the steady plant noise around a unit that had already started telling the truth. And she prepared for the next argument with evidence that couldn't be shouted down. Grant did not give her the next argument. He gave her an order. "Drop the hold and start the warm circulation ramp," he said, voice clipped and loud enough for the deck. "We'll stay low. Prove stability and move. Do it now." Denise set the printout on the console and squared it with the edge. A small, precise movement that bought her one breath. She had learned long ago that the first response to a bad command shaped the entire chain after it. If she hesitated, the order became normal. If she answered clearly, the record began. "I can't execute that," she said. "Active acoustic escalation plus seam wall loss in the heat-affected zone means we are in crack growth territory. Low ramp is still ramp." Grant's expression flattened. "You're not the plant manager. I asked for warm circulation, not full pressure." Denise tapped the trend with one gloved finger. "Mechanism doesn't care what title gave the command. Listen carefully. The risk is not only peak pressure. The risk is pressure change plus temperature gradient across embrittled metal. At this stage, even a modest ramp can push stress intensity over local fracture toughness." 2 contractors exchanged a glance at the phrase, and she translated immediately. Plain language. Damaged steel can break at loads that looked safe yesterday. Grant gave a dismissive wave. The vessel held hydro last cycle. Hydro was a different temperature profile, and before this thinning progression, she said. Hydro doesn't erase hydrogen damage. It confirms one moment in time, not all future moments. He stepped closer again, crowding the console. You're turning procedure into theater. She met him without raising her voice. No, I'm applying procedure to observed degradation. The board operator at the auxiliary station kept his eyes on his screen, but his shoulders had gone rigid. Eli stood half a step behind Grant, trying to look invisible and failing. Denise could hear the hiss of tracing steam below deck and the rhythmic knock from a condensate trap that had started sticking around Dawn. The unit sounded routine. That was always the trap. Routine sound made people confuse familiarity with margin. Grant pointed at the startup key where it sat on top of the console. Put it in and begin sequence. Denise lifted the key with 2 fingers, then placed it in the red tag key lockbox mounted beside the panel. She closed the lid, snapped the hasp, and threaded a numbered seal through the eyelet from the integrity hold kit. The plastic seal clicked. Several people watched that tiny sound as if it were louder than the blowers. I secured the key under hold code 4A, she said. Chain of custody starts now. Grant stared at the sealed box. You think that protects you? It protects everyone in range of that shell, she replied. He leaned in until his hard hat brim almost touched hers. Last chance, Denise. Break the seal. She kept her hands at her sides. No. The word landed clean and final. No qualifiers, no apology, no performance. Around them, radios continued to crackle from other units, moving normal product, normal pressures, normal risk. On Unit 4's deck, normal had already ended. Grant shifted tactics, voice dropping into faux patience. Walk me through your nightmare one more time, then. Entertain me. Denise did not miss the bait. He wanted her to sound emotional, speculative, dramatic. She gave him mechanics. Pitting at the seam toe created stress concentrators. Hydrogen exposure over years reduced ductility in and around the weld heat-affected zone. Acoustic emission clusters show active strain energy release at that same coordinate. If we introduce feed before proper staged preheat equalizes shell temperature, a cold, lean slug can impose thermal shock at the lower shell. Pressure ramp adds hoop stress. Combined load pushes crack growth from subcritical to unstable. Unstable longitudinal fracture can unzip the seam in under a minute. She pointed through the glass toward C4403, then to the east side motor control center, then downwind toward the contractor brake area. If that happens, fragments will not stay politely at grade. We have occupied exposures on 3 sides. Grant crossed his arms. You're describing a movie. I'm describing fracture mechanics. For a moment he said nothing. A forklift horn sounded twice from a neighboring alley. Somewhere below, someone laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with Unit 4. Denise felt the surreal split that came in high-risk operations. Most of the plant kept living, while one node approached a binary edge. The shift superintendent came on radio. Unit 4 status update. Grant grabbed his handset and answered first. Temporary procedural disagreement. Startup pending local resolution. Denise keyed her own radio the instant he released. Unit 4 integrity hold active with escalating AE near seam thinning zone. Restart not authorized pending mechanical engineering disposition. A short silence followed. Then the superintendent replied, More careful now. Copy both. Maintain safe state. I'm on my way up. Grant turned to her, jaw tight. You just escalated past me. I escalated to policy, she said. By 6:41, sunlight had reached the upper railings and made the caution tape glow. The superintendent arrived with site safety and a mechanical engineer from daytime staff, Priya Nand, still carrying a tablet and coffee she had not touched. Denise briefed in less than 2 minutes. Data first. Conclusion second. Priya scrolled through the attachments, zoomed into S17L, and frowned in the way engineers did when numbers removed room for optimism. Grant cut in before Priya spoke. "We can run a controlled bump to gather more data," Denise answered immediately. "Running compromised pressure boundary to get more data on whether it fails is not diagnostics. It's exposure." Priya nodded once, eyes still on the screen. "I need on-metal verification and fracture assessment before any ramp." Grant's tone sharpened. "How long?" "Not 10 minutes, Priya said. "Possibly several hours depending on access and insulation removal." Grant looked from Priya to Denise, saw alignment, and understood he was losing the deck in real time. He changed from argument to authority. "Everyone except operations clear this station," he said. "I want private discussion with my startup specialist." The superintendent hesitated, then moved 3 steps away with Priya and safety still in earshot. Grant lowered his voice, but not enough to be private. "You embarrassed me in front of contractors and leadership," he said. "You've stalled a critical unit on turnaround day because you enjoy saying no." Denise felt anger rise again, controlled and cold. "I stalled a critical unit because the shell is showing active crack behavior." He gave a short laugh without humor. "No, you stalled it because you're risk-averse and outdated." She answered with the same cadence she used in training rooms. "Safety is not a personality trait. It is threshold management." Grant's eyes hardened. "Threshold management doesn't pay delay penalties." "Catastrophic failure pays larger ones," she said. The superintendent stepped back in, trying for neutral. "Let's keep this procedural." Denise nodded. "Procedural is simple. Hold remains. Engineering evaluates. If disposition says repair and re-rate, we repair and re-rate. If disposition says retire vessel, we retire vessel." Grant looked at the superintendent. "And miss throughput before shift change? We have feed commitments and an investor call at noon." There it was again, the real driver, stated in operational language. The superintendent did not answer immediately. Priya did. "Throughput doesn't rewrite material condition," she said. "I support hold." Grant stared at her, then at Denise, then back to the sealed key box. He smiled in a way that told Denise the conversation had left technical ground. "Fine," he said. "If the issue is personnel confidence, I'll solve personnel confidence." He turned to the superintendent. "Remove Denise from startup authority for Unit 4 effective now. Assign Eli Morton under direct supervision. We proceed with minimal ramp protocol." The words snapped the deck into a new shape. Eli took a half step back as if physical distance could deflect responsibility. The board operator looked up for the first time in several minutes. Priya straightened, ready to object. Denise spoke first. "You do that, you own written override," she said. "Name, time, and explicit deviation from integrity hold." Grant faced her with open contempt. "Gladly." The superintendent looked trapped between chain of command and the engineer beside him. "Grant, this is not clean." Grant kept his eyes on Denise. "Do it or you can explain missed production to corporate." Priya said, "I will not endorse startup." "Noted," Grant said. "This is operations authority." Denise pulled a blank management override form from the emergency binder and laid it on the console. Her hand stayed steady. "Then fill this out completely. Specify which safeguards you're bypassing and why." Grant snatched the pen and began writing hard enough to gouge the paper. Denise read upside down as he moved line by line. Justification, schedule recovery, mitigation, limited ramp, temporary adjustment of low-pressure trip band for nuisance avoidance during warm circulation, duration, until stable feed confirmed. Authorizing manager signature, Grant Voss. Time, 6:49. He shoved the form toward the superintendent for witness initials. The superintendent hesitated, then initialed with obvious reluctance. Priya refused when Grant pushed the pen to her. Document that I objected, she said. Denise wrote it herself in the remarks field. Mechanical engineer dissent recorded prior to execution. Grant pointed at Denise's badge. Turn in panel authority token. You are off controls. She unclipped the magnetic token from her vest and placed it beside the sealed key box. Done. Leave the deck. No, she said. I remain as incident witness under policy once formal objection is logged. He looked like he wanted to argue, then recalculated and pointed to a spot behind the yellow boundary at the rear console. Stand there and stay quiet. Denise walked to the marked position and stopped. She was no longer at the controls, but she still had out a line of sight to the vessel trend screens, strain display, and microphone channels. She took out her pocket notebook and wrote the sequence in block letters with timestamps, each entry concise and factual. Words mattered when memory went soft under pressure. Grant turned to Eli. You're on panel. Follow my commands exactly. Eli's face had gone pale under refinery dust. Sir, with the hold, Grant cut him off. There is no hold now. There is my order. Sit down. Eli sat. Grant pointed to the console. When I say you initiate warm circulation, keep ramp smooth. Ignore nuisance chirps unless I ask. Denise spoke from behind the line, voice clear and measured. Eli, if shell ping clusters accelerate or you hear hammering through wall mics, call stop into pressure. That instruction is on record. Grant spun toward her. I said quiet. She did not answer him. She looked at Eli instead. He did not meet her eyes, but he gave the smallest nod, barely visible. The board operator quietly printed another copy of the override and slid it toward Denise's side of the rear console without looking up. She took it, folded it once, and placed it in her notebook. Physical evidence secured. At 6:53, Grant keyed the radio to dispatch. Unit 4 resuming controlled startup under management supervision. Dispatch replied, Copy, Unit 4. External contact logged. Grant planted both hands on the panel behind Eli and stared at the main pressure trend, like he could force the line to obey willpower. Denise watched the sealed key box get opened under written override, watched Eli's gloved hand hover over the sequence controls, and felt the whole unit tighten around a decision that had stopped being technical several minutes earlier. Controlled defiance had held as long as procedure held. Now power pressure had taken the chair, and every person on that deck understood they were no longer discussing risk in theory but stepping into it by command. Eli's right hand hovered over the sequence controls, while Grant stood so close, his sleeve brushed the back of Eli's hard hat. Denise stayed behind the yellow boundary with her notebook open, tracking each action against the override text that sat folded in her pocket. The startup screen showed permissives in a narrow green column, but two of those greens came from widened trip logic that should never have been touched without engineering concurrence. Grant had called them Nuisance protections. Denise read them as blindfolds. Begin warm circulation, Grant said. Eli did not move. Grant's voice hardened. That was a direct order. Eli pressed the first key. A relay clicked under the console, then another in sequence, the familiar hardware chatter of a unit waking into motion. On the trend screen, inlet valve position edged from 0 to 7%, then 10. Pump vibration climbed in a smooth curve. A low hum spread through the deck grating and settled into Denise's boots. She marked the time in block letters. 6:54:11. Feed path opening under override. The board operator leaned toward his microphone. Unit 4 circulation initiating, he said to dispatch, keeping his tone level by effort. Dispatch acknowledged with a clipped copy and logged it into the shift record where every second would later be pulled apart. Denise watched the shell temperature profile populate across the right screen. Upper shell remained within expected preheat drift. Lower shell lagged by nearly 60 degrees at 2 sensors near the seam band. That spread was the mechanism she had warned about, now moving from theory to live data. She spoke without looking at Grant. Delta T at lower shell is still too wide. Stop and equalize. Grant answered immediately. Maintain ramp. Eli's jaw flexed. He advanced to the next set point at Grant's nod. At 6:54:19, 8 seconds after feed introduction, the skin microphone panel flashed amber, then red again, in rapid succession. 3 sharp acoustic hits landed in the same coordinate family as S17L. Even through the deck noise, Denise heard a faint metallic tick from the vessel body like a small wrench dropped inside a steel drum. Ping cluster, she said. Same location. Call stop. Grant pointed at the pressure trend. Pressure is stable. Keep going. Eli looked over his shoulder once, then back to the screen. Sir, AE is spiking. I said keep going. Denise keyed her radio to the superintendent channel. Unit 4, active ping cluster during ramp, requesting immediate startup halt. The superintendent came back through static. Received. Hold position while I route. Grant cut across on his own radio at the same moment. Control disagreement only. Ramp remains controlled. 2 messages entered the system at once. One technical, one political. Denise wrote both times down and underlined them. The vessel answered with another tight burst. The hits arrived not as random chirps, but as grouped packets, each packet slightly higher in amplitude. Denise had seen that stair-step pattern in training reconstructions, and one archived incident in Corpus. Material response was becoming non-linear under load. She called out to Eli, voice precise and audible. If hit rate accelerates to pressure, you have grounds. Eli swallowed and nodded once without turning. By 06:54:32, shell strain trend crossed from green into high amber. The display didn't scream yet. It issued a measured alarm tone, almost polite. The worst kind because polite alarms were easy to ignore. Denise stepped closer to the rear console to verify scaling. It was not instrumentation drift. Strain at the lower longitudinal seam had exceeded the caution band at lower than planned pressure. 21 seconds, she said. Strain over alarm threshold. Stop now. Grant did not even glance at her. Hold ramp. The board operator's fingers paused over his keyboard. Denise saw him choose the safer form of descent available to him. He printed the live trend and placed it in clear view on the console edge. Timestamp bold across the top. Paper evidence. No argument. No theatrics. The low-frequency wall microphone channel came alive with a dull internal thudding that sat under the normal unit hum. It was subtle at first, then repeated in uneven intervals, as if something inside the vessel was tapping from a long corridor. Eli heard it through his headset and stiffened. "You hear that?" he said. Grant snapped, "Process noise." Denise answered, "That is not process noise. That is wall hammering." At 6:54:56, 45 seconds into live feed, Eli said it into the room and into the recorder at the same time. "I'm getting hammering in the wall mics, recommending stop." Grant leaned over him, one hand braced on the panel. "Hold ramp. We need throughput before shift change." Eli's hand drifted toward the stop sequence key cluster and halted midair. Denise felt the entire deck narrow again, not physically, but morally. Everyone could now hear the unit complaining in real time. Nobody could claim uncertainty. The next choice would not be a misunderstanding. It would be a declaration. She keyed dispatch on emergency advisory channel. Unit 4 requesting standby fire and medical at perimeter. Integrity event developing. Dispatch answered faster this time. Fire team rolling. ETA 2 minutes. External contact logged and moving. The strain trend jerked upward in a short spike. Dropped half a division, then climbed again. That oscillation was worse than a clean rise. It suggested localized yielding and load redistribution along a defect path. Denise had written those words in incident reports before. She had never wanted to watch them happen from 30 meters away. She raised her voice and pointed at the screen. "Crack growth is running. Stop and depressure now." Grant turned toward her with open anger. "You are off panel." "Stay silent," Eli said very quietly. "Sir, we should abort." Grant's reply came like a hammer. "Run the sequence." For one suspended moment, Eli did nothing. Denise could see his breathing and the movement of his shoulders. Then he obeyed and held the ramp at Grant's commanded rate, slower than full startup, but still climbing, still loading a damaged seam with every second. A mechanic on the lower walkway shouted up from outside the taped boundary. "Why is that shell pinging?" No one answered him. In the final seconds before rupture, the dawn light had fully reached the vessel, flattening every shadow on the shell, so the seam looked like a pencil line drawn on ordinary steel. Denise hated that ordinariness. Catastrophe rarely looked dramatic beforehand. It looked manageable until the exact second it wasn't. At 6:55:08, 57 seconds after feed introduction, the sound came. It started as a ripping metallic crack that ran upward faster than thought, a zipper tearing through plate. The lower seam split, and the fracture raced along the longitudinal line in a bright, violent line of motion. The vessel's upper head separated with a twisting snap and launched clear of its skirt, turning once in the air before disappearing across the pipe alley. "Down!" Denise shouted. The blast wave struck the control deck half a heartbeat later. Glass in the control room wall exploded inward in a sheet of glittering shards. Denise was thrown against the rear console and felt the breath punched out of her chest. The board operator hit the floor beside his chair. Eli and Grant vanished below the console line as alarms went from polite to full continuous scream. A second fragment, smaller but still massive, crossed eastward and slammed into structural steel near the motor control center with a deep impact thud that shook cable trays and sent insulation dust into the air like gray smoke. Metal rang across the unit in layered echoes. Then came the hiss roar of superheated amine, flashing to vapor. A white cloud erupted from the torn shell and rolled low before billowing upward, dense and fast, swallowing the lower platforms in seconds. It was not flame at first. It was pressure and heat and chemistry made visible, a toxic fog pushed by its own momentum. 3 workers near the south access were knocked off their feet by the wave front, sliding across wet grading and concrete, but staying clear of direct flame zones. Denise forced herself up, lungs burning, ears ringing in a high, steady tone. She grabbed the emergency handset mounted at the rear station and hit the red button. Unit 4 major integrity failure, vessel rupture, Amican release, activate full emergency response, isolate Unit 4 feed and utilities now. Control acknowledge with a clipped, shaken, copy major integrity failure. Then the sound of multiple voices and relays in the background as remote shutdown commands cascaded. On the deck, strobe beacons strobed red through the white cloud. A cable tray on the west side sparked, then ignited where hot fragment impact had stripped insulation and shorted conductors. Flame licked along bundled jackets in quick orange runs, before suppression water started from the deluge header in pulsing sheets. Denise crawled to the fallen board operator first, checked responsiveness, and dragged him behind the concrete instrument pedestal away from broken glass. He coughed hard, nodded once, and clutched his shoulder but stayed conscious. "Stay low. Breathe through cloth," she said, tearing a clean rag from the spill kit and handing it to him. She moved to the console edge where Eli was on his knees, dazed, one glove shredded at the fingertips, eyes wide and fixed on the ruined window frame. "Eli, can you stand?" He blinked, focused on her, then nodded. "I can stand." "Then move. Rear stairs. Now." Grant was still on the floor, not trapped, staring toward the vessel through a haze of dust and vapor, with the stunned expression of a man watching his own certainty detonate. A shallow cut on his forehead leaked down the side of his face, minor compared to what had almost happened, but he seemed unable to process commands. Denise grabbed the front of his coverall and pulled him upright with Eli's help. "Walk." He stumbled once, then found his feet. "What happened?" he said, voice thin, disbelieving. She did not answer him. The unit had already answered. At 6:56:22, 74 seconds after rupture, fire water pressure stabilized, and the first fixed monitors began sweeping the release zone. 2 emergency crew members in SCBA appeared at the north stairwell and signaled for evac routing. Denise pointed toward the 3 downed workers at south access and gave a rapid status report. "All moving. Possible inhalation and impact injuries. No one pinned from what I can see." The crew leader acknowledged and relayed medical priorities by radio. Sirens from the internal response trucks rose from the service road, then multiplied as mutual aid from adjacent units rolled. Denise took one last look at C-4403. The shell was open along the seam exactly where the red-hatched map had warned, edges curled outward, internals exposed, in twisted silhouette. Steam, vapor, and suppression water mixed into a drifting white-gray plume that moved downwind away from the break area because the perimeter she had demanded earlier had kept that zone clear. Procedure had not prevented rupture. It had reduced the body count. As they descended the rear stairs, alarms still screaming above them, Denise heard dispatch repeat the incident class across channels and request accountability by name. She answered for herself, for Eli, for the board operator, then added 2 contractors confirmed mobile and 1 awaiting stretcher at South Gate. Each name returned with a terse, copy, turning panic into inventory. On the asphalt muster lane, with broken glass still falling and occasional tinkles from the shattered control room frame, she looked back once more at the torn vessel and the smoking cable run, and understood that the argument on the deck was over forever. Grant had demanded speed. Physics had delivered verdict in under a minute. Physics had delivered verdict in under a minute, and Denise had to turn that verdict into names, counts, and decisions before panic scattered the facts. On the muster lane, she took the accountability board from a shaking contractor lead and started calling roll by crew, not by company, because mixed teams always lost people on split lists. Operations first. Say here and step left. Voices came back through sirens and radio bursts, some steady, some ragged. Eli answered on the second call, hoarse but upright. The board operator answered with his arm braced to his chest. 3 welders from South Access answered late after oxygen masks went on. Then one of them doubled over coughing, and a medic moved him to the red tag group for transport. Grant stood 10 feet away, blood drying at his temple, repeating to anyone near him, "We were in controlled ramp. We were in controlled ramp," as if saying it enough times could alter logged timestamps. At 7:01, the unit emergency coordinator reached the lane with the first formal incident packet. "Hayes, I need sequence and suspected failure point now." Denise took the grease pencil and wrote in block print on the board clipped to his chest. 65411 feed. Introduction under override. 65419 first ping cluster. 65432 strain alarm exceedance. 65456 wall hammering reported. 65508 seam rupture and head separation. She added one more line beneath it. Management override signed 649. Low pressure trip thresholds widened. Then she circled the time of the emergency call she had made for standby fire and medical. "That call is on dispatch audio," she said. "Pull and preserve." He nodded once, eyes narrowing as he read. "You have documents?" "On me. Duplicate in control room printer tray unless it burned." "Don't hand originals to anyone except investigation chain," he said. She already knew. She had seen too many post-incident rooms where paper became opinion in under an hour. Firewater swept in long arcs over Unit 4 while the white Amen cloud thinned and lifted. The hiss of steam met the chop of rotor wash as a medical helicopter passed overhead without landing, then diverted when ground transport was confirmed faster through the east gate. Denise watched medics load 2 contractors with thermal burns from the cable tray flash zone. Their injuries were serious and life-changing, but they were talking, and talking mattered. No body bags appeared. That absence hit her harder than any alarm. The perimeter she had demanded before rupture had done exactly what perimeter rules were written to do: keep bystanders out of fragment lanes and vapor paths long enough for luck to have less work to do. At 7:18, accountability closed with all personnel identified. Site command shifted from rescue posture to evidence preservation. Denise and 2 incident techs re-entered the damaged control deck in respirators after air monitoring came back below immediate danger limits at the rear stairwell. The room looked like a storm had passed through machinery. Shattered glass across keyboards, insulation dust on screens, one panel door hanging open from blast pressure. She moved straight to the rear console, retrieved her notebook, and sealed it in an evidence bag marked with her name time and witness signature from the incident tech beside her. Then she went for the rest of the chain. The folded override form in her pocket, creased once, still legible. The printed AE trend sheets with bold timestamps. The strain chart, print out the board operator had slid toward her before rupture. The control log entry for hold code 4A with attachments. The lockbox seal number from the integrity key hasp, photographed in place before Grant had opened it. She read each item aloud while the evidence custodian logged it. Item 1, Management Override, signed Grant Voss, 649. Item 2, Live Trend, timestamp 654 through 655. Item 3, Hold record with engineering objection note. Procedure turned shock into sequence. Sequence turned sequence into accountability. Grant tried to enter the deck twice and was stopped at tape both times. On his second attempt, he pointed toward Denise and said to the coordinator, "She escalated this and confused the operator. Put that in your record." Denise answered before the coordinator could. Put in the record that the operator reported wall hammering at 6:54:56 and recommended stop. Eli, from a chair near triage with a blanket around his shoulders, looked up and said, louder than anyone expected from him, "I said abort. He told me hold ramp." His voice cracked on the last word, but the sentence landed intact. The coordinator wrote it down. By 8:05, the Refinery Emergency Operations Center was running at full tempo in the admin building conference room. Maps taped over windows, whiteboards split into safety, operations, environmental and legal tracks. Denise sat at the operations table with Priya and the superintendent, while planners built the first 24-hour stabilization plan. Unit 4 feed was isolated. Adjacent units were in controlled rate reductions to protect utilities. Electrical teams were tracing the damaged cable tray to prevent secondary faults. Every line item had an owner and a due time. Finance sent in a preliminary loss model at 8:40 that everyone knew was optimistic. Direct physical damage to Unit 4 equipment, structures, controls, and electrical came in at $24.3 million in the first pass. By 11:20, after drone imagery confirmed fragment strikes on the East Steel and MCC enclosure, the number moved to $31.7 million. It would climb again. At 9:10, Environmental entered with field data that widened the room's silence. Storm drain samples from the South Trench showed elevated amine signature not explained by the rupture plume alone. One sample point upstream of Unit 4's blast runoff path was positive, which meant contamination predated the explosion window. Denise remembered the previous afternoon's chatter about a small spray on a sister line and a hose crew sent out without fanfare. She looked at the environmental lead. "Was there a logged discharge yesterday?" The lead shook his head. "No entry in permit log. No immediate report filed." Priya said quietly, "Then this is pattern, not accident." That single sentence changed the legal board. What had started as catastrophic mechanical failure now carried potential falsification and non-reporting exposure. The delayed consequence had arrived on paper, exactly how these things often did. Not in flame, but in timestamps that refused to line up. At 10:02, hospital liaison reported worker status. 3 downed workers from the vapor wave were treated for inhalation and impact injuries and expected to recover. 2 contractors from the cable tray ignition had deep thermal injuries, requiring transfer to a regional burn center. No fatalities. Denise wrote all 5 names in her notebook under a line labeled "Lives," then underlined "no fatalities" twice, and closed the page for a moment to keep her hands steady. The insurer's incident response attorney joined by secure call at 10:30, voice crisp and detached. "We need confirmation whether safety interlocks were bypassed by authorized management." Legal looked to operations. Priya gestured to Denise's evidence log. Denise answered with dates, tags, and configuration IDs. Low-pressure trip thresholds were widened under signed override at 6:49. Engineering objection documented before execution. Integrity hold was active before override. The attorney paused, then asked the question everyone in the room already understood. Was there any emergent condition requiring immediate bypass to preserve life? No, Denise said. Bypass was used to accelerate startup. Another pause, shorter this time. Understood. By early afternoon, the direct damage estimate reached $38.6 million and stopped moving long enough to brief executives. That figure included vessel replacement, structural repair, MCC rebuild, instrumentation replacement, cable tray reconstruction cleanup, and contractor demobilization/remobilization costs. It did not include business interruption. It did not include litigation. It did not include reputation, which never fit cleanly in columns anyway. At 14:30, 32 hours after Denise's first hold entry, if counted from the prior night review cycle, the refinery issued a formal Unit 4 outage notice. Initial restart projection, 90 to 120 days, pending metallurgical analysis and regulator approval. Denise read the draft and said, "That window is fantasy unless they replace more than the vessel." She listed dependencies in order: fragment impact NDE on adjacent lines, full controls recertification, MCC rebuild, updated startup protocol, retraining, and regulator witness testing. The planner adjusted the bar chart in silence. 3 days passed before dispatch audio transcripts were circulated to the incident core team. The recording preserved every contested sentence. Denise heard her own voice requesting halt at 6:54:19, again at 6:54:32, again at 6:54:56. She heard Eli's recommending stop. She heard Grant's hold ramp. There was no ambiguity left for memory to manipulate. On day 6, metallurgical lab results returned from the seam fragments. Hydrogen-assisted cracking in the heat-affected zone. Reduced toughness relative to baseline. Fracture origin consistent with the thinned toe region near S17L. Thermal gradient contribution probable during startup transient. Priya read the report aloud and tapped the table once. Mechanism confirmed. On day 9, insurance sent a reservation of rights letter, then a provisional denial notice tied to willful override exclusions and deviation from written integrity hold protocol. The refinery's risk manager argued scope and wording, but the carrier's position held. When management intentionally bypassed safeguards for schedule gain against documented objection, coverage narrowed sharply. The phrase willful override appeared 7 times in 6 pages. By the second week of October, external regulators had opened parallel tracks: process safety incident investigation and environmental non-report inquiry linked to the unlogged sister line amine discharge. The environmental team matched drain chemistry to amine batch markers from the previous afternoon, then matched hose usage records to a work order closed without incident code. Someone had tried to save hours by hiding a reportable event. Those hours now sat inside a criminal file. Grant was placed on administrative leave, pending board review, before legal interviews began. He stopped appearing in the operations trailer. His name remained on the signed override form, unchanged by absence. Eli returned to site after medical clearance and gave his statement twice, once to internal investigators and once to regulators. He did not embellish. I heard hammering. I asked to abort. I followed the order. Denise sat outside the interview room for the second session, not as coach, only as witness support under policy, and watched him come out looking older than he had the week before. Industrial incidents aged junior operators in one shift. At the 30-day executive review, outage projection moved from 120 to 173 days after structural inspections found additional blast deformation along the east pipe rack and latent cable damage beyond the initial burn zone. Procurement lead times for a replacement pressure vessel and certified seam fabrication pushed critical path into late winter. The room accepted 173 because the math left no alternative. The final casualty accounting for that review stayed unchanged: 0 fatalities, 2 life-altering burn trauma cases, 3 treated and released after inhalation and impact injury, multiple minor injuries from blast glass and falls. Denise read the list and thought about the taped perimeter at 6:34, the order people had grumbled about, the detour that felt annoying at the time. Safety often looked inefficient until measured against ambulances. At the same meeting, communications presented reputational impact. 2 major customers shifted short-term volume to competitors, one citing confidence in operational governance in writing. Recruiting reported withdrawal of several experienced contractor bids for the next turnaround cycle, pending proof of corrective action. The cost of arrogance was now compounding outside Unit 4's fence line. When the board's interim findings were issued, they aligned almost line for line with Denise's first deck warning. Active degradation was known. Startup hold was valid. Override bypassed layered safeguards. Warning cues during ramp were explicit and ignored. Environmental non-report indicated broader governance failure. The finding used formal language, but the meaning was plain. This was preventable. Late that evening, after the review room emptied, Denise stood alone at the operations whiteboard where someone had written the current tally in black marker: direct damage $38.6 million. Unit 4, outage 173 days. Insurance coverage disputed/denied under override clause. Environmental enforcement pending. She added one line at the bottom in smaller print, then capped the marker. No rule was cosmetic. She did not need to underline it. Everyone in that building had already learned the sentence the hard way. Priya read it over Denise's shoulder, then gave a tired nod and set a printed notice on the table. Board discipline panel, 7 o'clock tomorrow. Formal witness list is attached. They want primary sequence testimony from you, Eli, the board operator, and the South Line hose crew lead. Denise scanned the bottom line. Grant Voss was listed as respondent, present with counsel. They're moving faster than usual. They got the dispatch transcripts and the environmental lab match in the same folder, Priya said. Speed appears when liability lines up. At 6:58 the next morning, the disciplinary room in Admin Building C smelled like burnt coffee and copier heat. Denise sat at a long table with a numbered exhibit binder in front of her. The evidence custodian broke the seal in view of the recorder and began placing items one by one under a document camera. Exhibit 1, he said. Management override form, timestamp 6:49, signed by Grant Voss, contains deviation from active integrity hold and temporary widening of low-pressure trip thresholds. He slid it right. Exhibit 2. Hold Code 4 A-log entry by Denise Hayes with UT, PAUT, AE attachments and mechanical engineered descent notation. Slide. Exhibit 3 printed live strain and acoustic trend sheets, 654 to 655. Slide. Exhibit 4 key lockbox seal photograph and custody record. Slide. Exhibit 5 Denise Hayes notebook, incident contemporaneous notes. Slide. Exhibit 6 dispatch audio transcript and synchronized control room recording. Slide. Nothing stayed abstract once it was numbered and read aloud. Grant sat across the room in a navy suit that made him look even more out of place than his clean, hard hat had on the deck. The cut on his forehead had faded to a thin line. He did not look at Denise until the recorder announced, "Witness Hayes, sworn." Board Chair Leland Kerr folded his hands. "Ms. Hayes, keep answers technical and direct. At 6:49, did you support startup?" "No, I maintained integrity hold based on measured wall loss, active acoustic emissions, hydrogen damage indications, and unresolved thermal gradient risk." "Did anyone overrule that hold?" "Yes. Mr. Voss signed a management override and removed me from panel authority." Grant's counsel stood. Objection to characterization. Removed from panel for operational cohesion, not suppression. Kerr did not look up. "Noted. Overruled for now. We have the form." He tapped Exhibit 1, then turned to Denise again. "At 6:54:56, what occurred?" "Operator Eli Morton reported wall hammering through microphones and recommended stop. Mr. Voss ordered hold ramp." Counsel said, "Your interpretation of intent?" Denise cut in, still even. "Not interpretation, transcript line and audio file." Kerr glanced to the recorder. "Play segment C." The speakers clicked. Then the room filled with the exact voices nobody could edit anymore. Eli: "I'm getting hammering in the wall mics. Recommending stop." Grant: "Hold ramp. We need throughput before shift change." No one moved while the clip ran into Denise's emergency call for standby fire and medical. When it ended, the silence was heavy and procedural, not dramatic, the kind that usually preceded a vote. The board operator testified next, shoulders still stiff, inside a borrowed blazer. "I printed the trend before rupture because I believed we were entering escalation, and I wanted paper if screens failed." Kerr asked, "Did Ms. Hayes direct you to print?" "No, I did that myself." "Did Mr. Voss instruct you to suppress any alarm?" "He told us to ignore nuisance chirps unless asked." Counsel rose again, tried to reframe nuisance as routine startup noise, and sat back down when the synchronized trend chart showed alarm class changes exactly where Denise had called for stop. Then the environmental thread arrived in full, and it ended whatever room Grant still had. The South Line hose crew lead, Thomas Ibarra, came in with his cap in both hands. He had given Denise a loaded look on the deck the day before rupture and never explained it. He explained it now. At 14:10, the prior day, sister line at 4B had pinhole missed. Mr. Voss told us, quote, "Hose it down and keep it off the log. We are not eating permit delay." I asked if environmental needed a call. He said, "No call." Grant's counsel tried, "Could you be confusing timing?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. I remember because he said it while I was holding the drain cover hook, and because I told my apprentice to grab absorbent anyway." The board called the apprentice. The apprentice confirmed it, added the exact phrase, "no log entry," and produced a phone photo, time-stamped 1413, showing a mine sheen near the trench grate before washdown. Distinctive detail resolved, documented, admitted. By 11:24, the panel recessed for 40 minutes and returned with a written finding packet, already signed. Kerr read, without flourish. Grant Voss is terminated for willful override of safety controls, falsification-related conduct, and failure to report an environmental release. Matter referred to State Process Safety Authority and prosecutor for potential reckless endangerment and records offenses. Effective immediately, Mr. Voss is barred from supervisory assignment across all affiliated sites. Grant finally spoke directly to Denise, voice raw and brittle. "You got what you wanted?" Denise held his gaze. "I wanted a safe startup." Security walked him out before he answered. 3 days later, Denise sat in interview room 2 at the regulator's district office, while 2 investigators aligned exhibits with the state charging memo. One investigator, Rena Cole, pushed the packet across the table. "We need chain confirmation on every physical item." Denise walked them through each one. "Override original to board file. Certified copy to your office. Hold log hash verified by control system admin. Trend printouts matched to historian checksum. Notebook retained under incident archive with duplicate scan. Lockbox seal number reconciled to custody card. Dispatch audio preserved from server mirror and carrier backup." Cole checked boxes line by line. "No gaps?" "None," Denise said. At 16:42, Cole took a call, listened for 20 seconds, and covered the receiver. "Charging approved. Reckless endangerment and falsifying safety records filed this afternoon. Environmental non-report added under separate count." Denise signed the final witness verification and watched the timestamp, stamped down in blue ink. External contact closed with outcome. That same evening, the risk manager called her into a short conference with legal on speaker. The insurer's final letter had arrived. Counsel read the operative sentence. "Coverage denied for principal loss elements due to willful managerial override contrary to documented integrity hold and dissenting engineering recommendation." No one argued. They had already run out of alternate narratives. On the first Monday after the board decision, Operations Training Room A filled every seat. Hard hats sat in laps. Supervisors stood at the back wall because there was no space left. On the projector screen was a new module title: Unit 4 Integrity Failure Case File, mandatory for Startup Authority Qualification. The first page was Denise's hold memo, unedited. The superintendent stepped to the podium. "Effective today, Denise Hayes is reinstated as lead startup authority for Unit 4 and appointed site lead for Pressure Boundary Startup Governance. Override forms now require independent mechanical sign-off and automatic regulator notification if integrity holds are bypassed. If you think that is bureaucracy, remember the number on the damage board." He turned to Denise. "Your floor." She stood with no notes. "You can dislike a stop order. You can argue schedule, cost, and commitments. You cannot argue with flaw geometry at operating temperature. If a vessel says no, your title says no." She looked at the front row where Eli sat, chin up this time. "When you hear hammering and your gut says abort, that is not fear. That is competence." A contractor in the back raised a hand. "What line do we carry to cruise?" Denise answered clear and slow. "Cosmetic language does not change structural reality." 173 days after rupture, Unit 4 stood rebuilt under winter light, new contactor shell painted flat gray, fresh weld maps in plastic sleeves at 3 stations, and an expanded preheat manifold installed exactly as Priya had specified. Denise stood at the panel with Eli on her right and Priya on her left. No one crowded anyone. No one pointed a finger. She read each permissive aloud, then each independent verification. Wall thickness baseline complete. AE calibration green. Thermal equalization within 10 degrees across lower shell. Trip thresholds at design set points. Locked. Eli answered each callback with the measured cadence of someone who had learned where hesitation belonged and where it did not. At 7:12, Denise inserted the startup key, paused, and looked through the glass at the vessel. Ordinary steel, ordinary dawn, no drama, that was the point. Begin staged preheat, she said. The sequence started. Trends rose smoothly, no ping clusters, no hammering. At the first pressure plateau, she held for verification exactly as the revised procedure required. Priya checked the strain band and gave a thumbs up. Eli exhaled a breath he had been holding for months. When Unit 4 reached stable operation hours later, the control room stayed quiet except for routine calls and printer chatter. Denise filed the final restart record and attached one sentence to the closeout note. Startup completed under full procedure without override. She signed, Eli countersigned, Priya countersigned, and the custodian stamped it into the permanent archive where the rest of the evidence already lived. All threads closed in the same place the argument had begun. Under the rule, nobody on that site would misuse again. Pressure vessels do not negotiate with ego.